Okay, so good morning. I hope you enjoyed the session this morning, the keynote. Did everybody get a lot out of that? Yeah, I did too. Anyway, this session I think is going to be of a great interest to you. This is David Guralnick, our speaker for the whole of this session. And David is a highly experienced learning professional. He's the founder of the International Conference on E-Learning in the Workplace, among many other roles. He's also an adjunct professor at Columbia University. What David's going to explore with us today is how to connect emotionally with a learning experience and how that can positively impact on performance. If you are going to be tweeting this session, please make sure you use the hashtag for the conference. I'm sure you know it now. And this is session T4S4. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for coming. I'm going to talk this morning about the heart and the head, the role of story and emotion in online learning. And I want to start with a brief example. I'm going to show you a little bit from a course from an audience of attorneys in the U.S. on continuing legal education. And this is a course to teach primarily big firm lawyers who are used to big firm clients and people who are working with big companies and that kind of thing. How to be a good pro bono attorney. So this is a course that was done with a client I've been involved in to try to teach people how do you deal with a situation where you're used to being a big firm attorney and now you're a pro bono attorney. You're working for free. You'd go back and you're doing this because you want to, but it's a very different kind of situation. The clients that you're working with are different than the ones that you've dealt with before. There's a very different power dynamic. The clients tend to be low income. They tend to have different constraints on their lives than you might think that they would. And so there's an entire course that's been very popular about this that we put together. So I'm going to show you a little piece of this, and then we'll talk about it from there. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is a video that starts pretty early on in the course that they see.
Again, Ms. Wilson, I'm Ray Richardson, and I'm the attorney who'll be looking into your case for you.
Thanks so much for seeing me. I'm just so torn up about this. I've barely slept since I got the letter. I took a sleeping pill, but that didn't help.
I'm here to help you, Ms. Wilson. Now, let's start by being clear about what we're doing. Okay, Legal Aid has asked me to take on your case, and I've agreed to do the work on your divorce for you. Now, we have about an hour, and my job during our time today is to understand what happened, answer any questions you may have, and to put together our to-do list for the next meeting. Now, in order to help me do that, I need to understand what you're dealing with. So
as you can see,
can you tell me exactly what happened?
Well, I got this letter, an official document from the court, saying that my husband was divorcing me. I mean, he moved out 3 months ago, but this letter was so final, And I didn't know it was coming. We haven't talked much lately. And the letter itself didn't make much sense to me.
Okay, well, let's talk through the petition. I have a copy right here. I've already read through it, so I'll be happy to walk you through it. Now, here's what your petition says. Your husband wants joint custody of the children and is asking for you to pay him child support.
He wants me to pay him. I couldn't afford that. He should pay. How will I be able to do this? I don't know what I'll do if I...
It's okay, That's just what he's asking for. It doesn't mean he's going to get what he wants. I'm here to represent your interests, but you do need to know that he's asking for support money from you. Plus, he's asking for you to pay your joint credit card debt.
That too? I really can't afford this. I can't believe he's doing this to me. This is unbelievable.
I know, Miss Wilson. People ask for outlandish things during divorce settlements, but it doesn't mean that it will happen, okay? My job is to try to understand the facts and to best represent you.
Okay, so this goes on for a little bit. This is a video that happens very early on in the course, as I mentioned, and people responded really, really well to this video. In fact, there are a couple of attorneys who I know have seen the course several times. They're kind of involved in the client who actually come to tears when they see her, every single time. They actually start crying as if it's a soap opera scene, and they really feel this. So one of the questions is why is this so compelling, and particularly why is this compelling to the audience for this course? Okay, this is one use of motion. One of the main characteristics is relevance. Okay, so it's not just that this was an actress who's in tears and sad and all that kind of stuff. But this is very, very relevant to what you're doing as an attorney, learning how to be good at pro bono law. This is the kind of real-life situation you may well encounter. Okay? So that helps you emotionally connect to it from the start. And it was dramatic. And that was, somewhat shamelessly, I suppose, in this case. It felt a little bit like a soap opera in that way. But it was a realistic one. It wasn't over the top. It didn't feel hokey or strange. That was certainly not the impression that people had. The characters were compelling and interesting. People felt that, hey, Ray Richardson's facing problems that I can face. I can see this. And, and then the whole thing was a dramatic situation. They weren't just talking about situations that were, not all that interesting or meaningful. She was going through a tough time. Her divorce was, difficult and unexpectedly difficult, and her about-to-be ex-husband was asking for a lot more than she expected. So, but again, these are the things that really happen in real life. So the drama came from the reality, and that really leads to the third part is that the drama didn't come at the cost of reality. This wasn't fake drama, right? It wasn't faux drama. This was drama based on exactly the kinds of things that happen in real life. And this story itself was not exactly somebody's real situation, which you probably can't actually do, but it came from a series of interviews with subject matter experts in this area who had worked in this field and came from their experiences, kind of aggregated and turned into something a little bit different. But this was, this really is the kind of thing that pro bono lawyers really do encounter. Now, traditional approach to the same client would look more like this. This is what normally happens in law training. Continuing legal education usually looks like this. They put up slides. There's nothing wrong with slides. I'm putting up lots of slides today. But compare the experience of reading this slide and trying to remember, hey, here are the things that I should remember being a pro bono attorney. Or going through this course where you're thinking about Ray and Jane and you're thinking about her situation, and we'll show you later, I'll show you some more activities where you analyze this and discuss this. It's a really, really different kind of learning experience, both in terms of effectiveness and in terms of the emotional connection. Okay, people see this, and even if they really want to be a great pro bono attorney, they're going to tune out a little bit. Tradition in U.S. continuing legal education is lectures. So it's either in person or a filmed version of a lecture that's totally non-participatory, totally no demos, no anything. It's slides that look like this. Maybe not even this pretty. Maybe with more text. And people will sit there from 9 to 5, and at the end of the day, they fill out a little card that says, yep, I'm still here, and then they get their credit. But they're not really all that much better at what they should be doing. Following this method with stories and video and an emotional connection to the project is a really, really different experience. It's going to be more what I talk about the rest of today. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more broadly about, now that we've seen one example, about compelling experiences and how to get there. I'll tell you one story from my life. I do a lot of seminars and I ask people to talk about their most memorable and most effective learning experiences from their lifetime. And I'll tell you one about mine. Mine is from 5th grade. To go all the way back to the mid-'70s. When I was in 5th grade, this is my elementary school. It's outside Washington, D.C. This actually is where I really went to school. It's a newer photo. It doesn't look doesn't look all that different from what it did back then. And when I was in 5th grade, we had a very memorable project. We were supposed to learn about U.S. state government. Okay, so we needed to learn, traditionally that would be what's the state flag and the state bird and what are the different laws in this state versus other states and how is the state government structured and all this kind of stuff. And, it's useful things to know, especially as a kid, learning how your country works and your state works. The way our project worked, we had an assignment from the teacher, which was pick any state that you want. And the goal was put together a scrapbook with whatever you can find that's going to tell the story of that state government. Okay, so it may include things like the flag and the bird and all that kind of stuff, anything else that you can do. And you chose your own state. This was kind of an ongoing thing for a number of weeks. You would meet with your teacher would meet with you individually. We had a small class. She'd meet with you individually every week. You would have group discussions as part of this. And you would also find yourself talking with your friends about the states that they were working on and what they were doing. So this turns out, here we are quite a number of years later, right? 40 years later, gracefully enough. This is still a memorable experience, and I can still tell you about it. And it really was something that connected with me and with pretty much everyone in the class. So we've kind of seen what this is. The end result was supposed to look something like this. I've given this example before and looked long and hard to try to find the actual scrapbook from 5th grade. Like, it's got to exist somewhere. somewhere in my parents' house. No matter how old you get, I think you just leave things in your parents' garage, or at least I do. I live in New York, there's no space, so, my parents' suburban house, there's lots of stuff. Have not yet found the actual scrapbook. Okay? But it looks something like this. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the logistics. We had one teacher, about 15 students. We did have some budget, so we didn't have trouble doing things like paying for long-distance calls. So you might call up the state and try to talk to the people in the state capitol and in the government office. This is back when long-distance calls cost money. It was a big expense. But we weren't just going to the library and doing research. We found ourselves with this kind of advice doing things like calling up the states, writing letters. Find out that your friend was talking to somebody and had written a letter that was addressed to, a particular level of government within the capital city. Like, hey, I should try that. And you go do it, and you might get something back. All of this contribute to your understanding of, what you would learn about state government and how it worked. I mean, who knew some of these positions even existed? We're very much encouraged to talk with each other about these projects. So they were individual projects, but you spend a lot of time collaborating with others. So here we are, years and years later. We all consider this a successful assignment, something we talk about for quite some time to come, even as you stayed friends with people over the years. Everybody remembered this project. So why was this? Well, a couple things. One is there was a strong element of learning by doing. Right? We weren't just going to the library and reading, the encyclopedia. Okay? We were doing something. We're constructing the scrapbook, we're putting it together, and we had a lot of control over the methods to do it as well. So it was a very active task. One-on-one coaching and mentoring was a really, really nice thing. Again, this required, in this case, as an in-person thing, some level of budget. We had a 1 to 15, teacher to student ratio. But you weren't really on your own. You had the right kind of assistance. You had somebody who was looking out for you and mentoring you, but she's not telling you what to do. She wasn't assigning tasks, hey, go call this person. She might make suggestions. She knew some of the things you could do. You were new at this. You were 10 years old. You didn't really know who to call, but your ideas were more than welcome. Your friends' ideas would come in, all of this, and then you would have somebody advising you, or if something wasn't really getting you where you needed to go, you would get some feedback on that. Okay, so it's a really, you formed a really nice relationship. And again, this helped you really, feel good about the entire experience. Collaboration with other students was another thing that played a key role. We really cared about the project and enjoyed the collaboration aspect. Overall, all of this led to an emotional connection to the project. And in fact, that actually started with the idea that you got to choose your own state. I chose the state of Pennsylvania, which is where I was born. Lived there for 1 year. My dad was a PhD student in Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So I lived there from the time I was born to age 1. And this was now in the state of Maryland, outside of DC. I didn't know very much about Pennsylvania. Thought it would be nice to know. It had some meaning to me. Had I been given the same thing where I was assigned the task of, hey, go study the state of Montana, no offense to anyone from Montana, although I'm probably pretty safe here, you never know. It's just not a state that I had a personal connection to. And it wouldn't have felt like the same product from the beginning, even if everything else about it was the same. So number one, I got to choose. So right there, I'm bought in, right? I have say in something that there's no reason I shouldn't. And then number two, as a byproduct of that, I got to pick something that I actually cared about. So I was doing the same task that I could have done with a state I didn't care about, with a state I did care about. And all of these things contributed tremendously to the way the project worked. All right, so I mentioned a little bit before that I tend to ask people to think about their own stories. So we're going to take in the spirit of the interactive nature of this conference, if we can take a couple minutes, think about what your greatest experience has been educationally. Not necessarily in school, anything. A lot of the good stories people have tend to not be from formal schooling. And if you want to take maybe the next, 3 minutes or so, think about something, and if you can turn to the person next to you and do the same kind of thing that we've been doing with Don, and share those stories. If you want to take 3 minutes or so, think about what your great experiences have been and share them with each other, and then we'll come back and talk about them for a few minutes. We could, I'm sure, talk about this for longer and longer, but what I'd love to do, now that you've had some time to think about it, is if a few of you want to share your stories with the group, the way I did about my 5th grade one. If anyone wants to, Julie's got the microphone, and I'd love to hear a couple of them.
Thank you. really good question, actually, as well. It's brought back a really good memory that I'd completely forgotten about. So my experience was when I was in year 6, so that's when you're like 10, 11 years old, we kind of built this town in the middle of the classroom. So we had a big square desk, and we built a town out of cardboard, and every single person in the class got to build their own building. So you could build a house or a block of flats or a bungalow, and you then created characters that lived in that building. And then all of the work we did all year was about the town. So you had you wrote stories about your characters that lived in your house, or you did maths about the shop in the town, or you did geography about the town, and it was just magic, really, to think back to. I'm sure it was nothing to do with the national curriculum or anything. But
Okay, that's great. All right.
Anybody else?
This motion publicly? Nobody ever does. All right. Well, one more? Okay, great.
I'm born in '61, so we didn't work at any project at my school. We didn't. But we had one teacher. She could tell stories. And then you can hear one raindrop fall. Everybody was quiet. And why? Because she was a good storyteller. But she also dropped your name somewhere in the story. So somewhere in the story you got a role. And that I never forgot. So.
I can just share one just very quickly. I think one of the most amazing learning experiences I had was learning to pack a parachute. And I paid attention. And then they gave me another one to pack, and they said, and it will be yours. I paid a lot more attention before I took my first jump. So that was a great emotional learning experience, because there was that horrible moment when you think, goodness me, if there hadn't been somewhere there to check that I'd done it right.
There's certainly a level of motivation when you know what the outcome will be. I don't think we can leverage that in all cases, but probably better that we can. But that's a great story. So if we want to talk for a little bit about the underlying themes and some of the characteristics of experiences. Oops, okay. Some of the characteristics of great experiences. So I put a few down that came from my other slide, from my own 10-year-old experience. We had collaboration. We also had the element of some kind of choice, right? So I had some kind of choice as a learner. What are some of the other things that came out of your stories? We mentioned storytelling as one, right? So, and I suppose, some level of personalization came from your story about, your name's going to get dropped in there. I know, Jem, how would you characterize some of the key features of your story? Or either.
It was always something about history.
Okay.
Because she taught history. But then she always, I think she made up things to the story so she could personalize. So you could be a little hero, a child. It was not that your name was called by a grown-up person. It was always in your age.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very familiar. It was not something that couldn't happen, although it was in a different time. So it was very recognizable, and it was very.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, we've lost the. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks.
So it was therefore you had a connection with the story because you could recognize it. It became your story. And the other children, that everybody was looking at each other. Oh yeah, we're now on the road to Egypt or something, because he made biblical stories and history stories, and you there was also was he did.
That's great. And I wrote that up as that last thing is a connection between the story and who the learner wants to be. I don't know if this is exactly right. But the idea that there's, one of the things that came out of that is that people were in a role that they were comfortable in. They, you said they get to be a hero. People like that. And it doesn't mean that's the only way to go, but, you were putting them motivating them by putting them in a position that they were excited about. So what about your year 6? Did I get the system right? Year 6 story, which I think is about the same as my 5th grade, but
yeah.
Which means you guys are ahead of us always, apparently.
So let's think, what was the kind of common themes? I think there was like an element of you felt like you were having an impact and like you had responsibility, like you were kind of part of it. I think that was a really big thing, because when you're at school, you're very often taught things, but you don't get to kind of shape what you're doing. So the fact that you felt like you could shape what you were doing, I think was really important. And I suppose going back to personalization, storytelling, kind of imagination as well, just kind of having ideas.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Imagination and creativity were both big parts of it. Probably not typing. Okay. anything else? Yeah, one more. And back behind the video. Julie's getting more of a workout than she expected to get in this session.
Thank you. I had an experience I work for an engineering company, and we operate on building and infrastructure. And for one of our safety trainings, we used the videos showing the wrong behaviors of people and how they should not work. So it's like training them what they should not do, and it really worked.
That's great. So that one, I think part of it is what seeing the bad consequences, right? So seeing the consequences is probably part of it, part of what made that work. Yeah, and then probably, I don't know, was there an element of fun in that? Like when you showed, were they fun bad consequences? Were they, I don't know. Someone, I don't know what fun is in this kind of video. Someone spills paint on themselves. I don't know. Things that people like watching. Was that true?
It was like what people cannot really watch by themselves. Like very shocking images and very shocking scenarios. It's like touching them. It's like soft skills, non-technical skills.
Okay, good. So it was shocking scenarios. So you see safety issues that were shocking, which again is going to get people's attention and draw them in emotionally. Great. So I'm going to move on a little bit. One of the things that's interesting when I've asked this question, and I've asked this to many, many people over the years, very rarely are the answers that people give, and this is a little different today, but rarely are the answers that people give their most memorable educational experiences from any kind of formal schooling. I know mine was, from my childhood. I had a very progressive elementary school that really follows a lot of the theories that we believe in. Was not traditional. We had, a couple today that were from workplace or from formal education. And that's unusual, actually. Usually when I ask this question, over 90% of the answers come back things that people learned outside any kind of formal schooling. Someone learned how to crochet from her aunt, and they formed a really nice relationship over it. Someone's sister taught her how to drive, and she really had looked up to her, and they kind of, had a bonding experience over that, and also learned how to, do something that was important. Sports teams playing with a group of kids they really liked and a coach they really liked. These are the kinds of things that come out really, really, really frequently when you think about what your experiences are that you really were tied to emotionally. And one of the things that's also interesting about a lot of these is that very rarely, almost even more rarely than do they come from formal schooling, do they come from online. And so, the example that I gave you was online, and my own work is primarily online, but we haven't done as an industry all that great a job of taking the emotional side of things and bring that into an online experience. Right? What we tend to do is mirror the traditional classroom experiences, which actually aren't all that emotionally compelling. And so that's kind of where we're going to try to go with a little bit of the rest of this. Okay. All right. Okay, so looking back, we're going to go back now, even further back than my 5th grade years, which is possible, to the early days, the apprenticeship model. Okay, so if you think back to training way, way, way back, it was the apprenticeship model. You would work with a master, right? You want to be a blacksmith, you would work with a master blacksmith, and you would learn the craft. This is how things worked. Okay? You have a coach, you have a mentor, you were applying your skills, you were learning how to do things, you weren't simply memorizing, information about how to be a blacksmith, you were actually doing it. And you would probably, you would start with simpler tasks and, just watching, and then move to doing some simpler tasks, and then move to doing harder tasks, right? So this is a really good model. In fact, it embodies a lot of the characteristics that really work quite nicely, right? It's a learn by doing approach. We've talked about learn by doing being a great thing. People learn by practicing. Okay? You had a coach, you had the mentor with you. They also weren't just a one-time event. So you'd form a relationship and you could continue to work with and consult with the masters. That was kind of a nice thing too. Right? It wasn't just you go in, you learn, and you're gone. So, we don't really see this that much today in the traditional sense. And why is that? Well, a lot of it certainly is that it's expensive in the big sense of expensive, right? You need a lot of time of the quote-unquote the master, okay? Whatever the area is, the expert time is expensive, okay? We couldn't possibly take each of these attorneys and have them apprentice to the best pro bono attorneys in the world. It's pro bono law, so I guess some of them are getting paid less, but no matter how you look at it, that wouldn't be practical. And particularly, and this is a key feature, it doesn't scale up, right? Really at the heart of everything, online learning to me is really about producing great experiences that do scale up, okay? Because here, apprenticeships are great, but masters are in short supply. Really, they went away because the world changed, Okay, we needed mass production of workers. We had a whole different world that we're in. You didn't need 1 or 2 blacksmiths. You needed, of each job you needed hundreds and thousands, and you couldn't possibly train them that way. You couldn't possibly teach people how to do anything that way. So we ended up with traditional classrooms. We ended up with people speaking and people taking notes and taking tests and all the things that we see in the classroom a lot today. But interestingly, and we also had in traditional approaches, apprenticeships could not serve a geographically disparate audience, right? If you're far away from the master, you could do some things, especially today with technology, but certainly that didn't work at the time. So we ended up with simple experiences, lecture, tests, memorization, things not being as applied as we wanted, but mostly because things didn't scale up and didn't scale up practically, financially. And now we have technology, right? We've had it for years, but it gets better and better. We talked about it this morning, talked about it in the last talk, how with Moore's Law, things are changing all the time. Think of this world compared to 10 years ago or 2 years ago, certainly compared to 40 years ago when some of our stories took place, or at least mine. We can create all these exciting experiences, right? We can do the video experiences, we can create simulations, we can create all kinds of different environments. It's getting better and better. There's virtual reality is, I'd say, just around the corner, and that's even almost, really less than that. We've got the Oculus Rift already out. We've got Microsoft's VR system coming out as well. We can do things like this, and when something's online, most of it will scale up, right? There are some parts where you rely on other people sort of who are somewhere else, but most of these things scale up. The video course that I showed you before a little bit of, the same course whether it's 1 person or 100 people or 1,000 people or 100 million people, right? It just sits there on the server. There's a little bit of it that's collaborative, that's a little bit trickier I didn't get to yet, but almost all of that course really scales up nicely. The compelling nature of that video scales up. You're going to find it as emotionally compelling whether you're the only person watching it or whether there are 1 million people watching it, and it's still going to be that compelling. So what we want to try to do is take advantage of that and use technology in all kinds of different ways. Right? Let me give you a different example about information and how we handle information. This is Madison Square Garden in New York. As they call it, the world's most famous arena. I have no idea if that plays on this side of the ocean, but it is considered the world's most famous arena. That's how we talk in the U.S. This is where, among other things, the New York Knicks play. I go to a lot of their games, so I'm there a lot. One of the things that they have traditionally done before the start of every game is post the rules of conduct on the scoreboard. Okay, so they got this giant scoreboard. There are a lot of rules. Okay, if you're going to behave well in Madison Square Garden, you have a lot of rules to follow. Okay, so I don't have it on the scoreboard, but these are the rules. The arena seats about 20,000 people. I can tell you how many of those, without doing an actual survey, because I have not done one, when they put this up on the scoreboard, of those 20,000, I think we could all guess how many are going to pay attention. I would guess 0, and I don't think I'd be wrong. Okay, people see this on the scoreboard and they tune out. Okay? Now remember, the goal of this is to convince people to not do these things. Be aware of them and don't do them. You put this up, nobody's going to read it. So you've put it all up there and you've accomplished absolutely nothing. Because either they weren't going to do them anyway, in which case that's great. If they were going to do them, they're certainly not going to stop doing them because of this thing that they're not even reading. It doesn't serve any purpose at all. Not even compliance, really. They're not even complying. So they kind of figure that out at Madison Square Garden, which is why they get into this talk. And what they did instead is they went with a video-based approach. This is a comedian named Billy Eichner who does a show in the US called Billy on the Street, where he goes around and interviews people about random things on the streets of New York. And so they had him standing outside of Penn Station, which is right where Madison Square Garden is, interviewing people on the street and asking them about things related to these rules of conduct. Hey, finds an old lady. Hey, did you know you're not allowed to spit in Madison Square Garden? And she just looks at him and says, oh, I don't want to be told whether I should spit or not. And everybody laughs and everybody watches. So here you've got 20,000 people, and they're actually watching. They pay attention. And there may be things that you didn't know not really difficult rules. They're mostly rules of being a good person. But there may be things that you really didn't know, exactly what you were supposed to do and not to do. But you pay attention. Now, the downside of this, it's not that much of a downside. You don't cover all 25 rules. You've got about a 3-minute clip. But the ones that you do, you pick the big ones, and people pay attention, and they get it. And they feel some kind of, again, there's an emotional reason why they care about this. They see this, it's fun, it's interesting, and it's sort of practical. Okay, I've seen the same thing in other ways, too. Delta Airlines has gone to, when they do the safety, I mean, you fly Delta, but I do a lot. When they do the safety instructions at the beginning of the flight, now they have a video that's, meant to be funny is actually, parts of it are funny, where they're showing things. They're not just telling you the rules where you automatically see the flight attendant pick up the little brochure and the little fake seatbelt and you just close your eyes, right? So we don't have to do that. They're trying to get your attention, moving again away from the idea that all education is simply, you are told you should listen. You don't listen. We're all people. We don't listen if we don't want to listen. Okay? Whether you're kids and probably even more when you're adults. Certainly if you're adult employees and you're sitting in a class and someone is telling you, here are the 25 abstract principles that you should know and you can remember, you've gone to sleep by the second one, maybe the first. Okay. A little bit of learning theory, many of you in this group will probably be familiar with. But that's relevant to this. It's relevant to the emotional connections and relevant to the effectiveness of the experience. It's a seminal paper by Brian Collins and Duguid in 1989 about situated learning, okay, which tells you that knowledge is situated, meaning it's in part related to the context. So it's the activity, context, and culture in which it's developed and used. Okay. They also talk about authentic activities, meaning the ordinary practices of the culture. Okay, so in the workplace, whatever the job is. So really the key point is that, according to cognitive science, knowledge is not really separate from doing, which is not the way a lot of traditional education works. Right? A lot of traditional education asks you to memorize the principles, not think about how to apply them. So we want to incorporate context and actions on the part of the learner, and authentic activities are great. And as we saw way back in the first video, in the dramatic video, what's really nice is that people will care about things that are realistic and things that seem relevant to their jobs. And authentic activities, in context information, all of that feels relevant and feels authentic and feels realistic to them. So emotion and cognition are going hand in hand here, which puts us in a really good position. Talk about something a little bit different. A little bit about design, and design sort of in the big picture sense of what does it mean to design an entire experience, whether it's learning or not. This is from 2002. Some of you may remember this. This is a little MP3 player. It's one of the early ones made by a company called iRiver. And it's kind of nice. It's a little, it's very small. It's good if you want to go running. In those days, there weren't a lot of things that played music. This is a pretty cool idea, right? And I had one. I was an early adopter. I tend to be early adopters of most things. Although not the 8-track, actually. I was right about that. But I tend to be an early adopter. I had one of these. The way you used it in practice was it plugged into you basically downloaded MP3 files onto your computer, and you plugged this thing in with a USB cable, and it kind of functioned like an external hard drive, and you would have to try to name your song files with something that kind of looked like the song name because you only had so many characters. And you would do that, and then you'd copy them into the folder that was appropriately labeled something that kind of looked like songs on the MP3 player, but probably not close to that. And you'd kind of figure it out the way it was going to work. And you'd copy these on, and then when you take this thing running, it would play them in, a particular order, whatever the order was, and you would kind of see a little bit of the name on the screen, which, don't even get to see here. Okay. Now, despite the fact that this was cool in a lot of ways, it didn't really take off, right? It didn't do all that well. Yet in the same year, this one did. Right? And you think about, well, why is that? And a lot of that is because the entire user experience, the entire experience of using one of these was very, very different. This is what Apple did with the first iPod that really was such a success. Right? At that time especially, you plugged it in, you downloaded your music into iTunes, which was actually sort of, was in English. It wasn't in file name language. Okay, you didn't have to worry about whether you had 8 characters, and then 3 after the dot. These are not things that normal people want to worry about. Okay, I was partly able to be an early adopter because I had a technical background. Otherwise, I probably would have been driven crazy. But with the iPod, you didn't have to do this. You downloaded things into iTunes, you plugged it in, it synced for you. Things would be on this machine. Hey, look, they're right there. Yep, it's a little bit bigger, but they've made good use of the screen. Again, you can find the songs you want, added some nice things like the wheel and being able to scroll through songs and create playlists and all that. It's a totally different world. It's a totally different world, not primarily because of the technology, right? Like either of these are really both competing MP3 players. That's what they were at the time. But the connection that people had with the iPod was very, very different from the connection that they had with this little iRiver device. And it had a very different emotional impact on people. And I don't know that everyone's always cognizant of why that is, and that's okay. Right? So, people ask people what they like about the iPod, and sometimes they would say things like they really like the wheel and they like the way it looks, and all those things are true. And Apple was certainly brilliant at that. They would create a visual look and feel and design that worked around that. But the heart of it wasn't really that. The heart of it was the entire process of using this thing is easy and makes my life, it's comfortable for me. Okay. Right? So again, when you're emotionally connecting to anything, that's a big issue. All right, so one thing to think about for just a couple of minutes, and we don't have a ton of time, so I don't think we're going to get too long on this, but if you take another 2 or 3 minutes and then we'll move on, but think about products that you really like in your life, anything you really like in the world, any kind of product that's out there, not necessarily technology, and think about why you like it. And so maybe take 2 or 3 minutes and we'll cut this off right on time, and think about what you like and why you like it, and then we'll talk a little bit about that before we move on. So one more, turn to your neighbor who now knows about your childhood experiences and talk about products that you like. Once again, Julie's ringing the homemade bell. You'd actually think that would be louder because it's connected to the microphone, but it doesn't seem to work that way. Well, good. So let's take us a couple of minutes and then we'll move on to other things. If you want to tell me a little bit about the things that what did you like and why, and we'll try to get some characteristics up on the list about that. So who's...
So a little bit of a departure from the iPod, although connected. It was my record player was the one I chose, and it links in with what you're saying because I've got a relationship with the album. It's a big conscious decision to take it out, and I have to actually put it on, and I have to put the needle on, and then I listen to the whole thing. So I have a relationship with that. It's tactile as opposed to just something you can just skip and change.
Do you still choose albums now? Over,
yeah, absolutely.
For that reason?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So for you, it really is part of it's the physical, is it part of it the memory too? Is part of it childhood memories that you grew up with them, or that's not really that big a factor?
Not particularly, but yeah, I mean they exist in my memory, but it's more the relationship and the decision I make to listen to this album, as opposed. Because the thing with MP3s is I don't listen to whole albums. You listen to a song and then you're like, okay, I'm done with this one. Yeah, skip, because it's too easy. So you don't develop a relationship with a whole album. You just listen to a song and it's too easy to skip and move on.
Interesting. So you choose it partly because it almost forces you to relax in a certain sense.
Yeah.
It forces you to be it forces you to get into a mental state you actually want, an emotional state you actually want to be in.
Exactly.
Right. So it's sort of the equivalent of playing, right. I guess soft music wouldn't be the right analogy because you're already talking about music, but setting the mood that you want to be in, and you find that the other, the alternatives are not really. You just kind of can't settle down.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. Okay. No, that's great. That's a great example.
So I like my digital radio because it does the things easily that were more difficult last time, like the tuning, so that's always perfect. Not only does it tell me what station I'm on, but also tells me like what piece of music's playing, who the singer is, or what the name of the program is. There's a nice, pleasing sort of fade between stations as you flick from one to the other, and it has a long charge on it, so I can go a long time without needing to plug it in anywhere to charge it back up again. So it can move around the house with me.
Great. Do you like the sort of uncertainty of what comes next? Is that part of it too? You really choose programs that you like in longer programs?
Yeah, I tend to choose programs that I like, but it's so easy to flick between them, whereas the old style where you had to kind of tune it in, you have to know what the name, you have to know what frequency that station's on, where it's all just alphabetical, it's really easy. And sometimes, because new stations are popping up the whole time, I'll suddenly, as I'm flicking through, spot something that I haven't seen before, and then I'll tune into that for a bit as well.
Okay, great. Is part of it also the just the massive size of the library that if you want, you can find pretty much anything you want?
Yeah, it is. It's that, and it's the information about what's there, and just the ease of use. Nothing about it's difficult. It's just really, really simple to do.
Right. That's great, and it's a really interesting example because the two of you have different preferences, and you're different people. You're going to have different preferences, right? And you have different goals. You might want to be more relaxed. You might want to get to something more quickly. Some people are more impatient, less impatient. Sometimes it depends on the mood you're in and the time of day and all those things. And everything's a factor. And again, as we talk about how we can create these kinds of learning experiences that people really do connect with, allowing these kinds of choices, allowing people's personal preferences to get in really plays a role. And we saw that in my 5th grade project as well. Just choosing the state was a big thing. Right? I'm a lot happier if I get to choose it. Okay, do we have one more hand that was up, I think?
I also thought about my first record player, but besides the point you had, it was very simple. It only had like the turntable in the middle and one rubber band making it go around, and then one button to turn it on and off. So yeah, the simple design, I think.
Okay. So the simplicity, ease of use. I think the other lesson out of this one, I think, is that you really do prime people with I give a music example, everybody gives music examples, so have to be careful about that. Are there any other examples? And anything from a different area?
I think for me it's the iPad at the moment. Mm-hmm. It's just so multifunctional. You can kind of use email, the internet, music, anything on there, and it's it's kind of updating itself all the time, really, as well.
Okay. All right, and I think maybe time for one more, and then we should probably move on after that.
Mine's the spiralizer. Okay. So it's really simple. You just put it on the end of a courgette, twist it, and out of it comes out healthy food that I can feel good about eating. It's really simple, makes me feel virtuous, and it's just brilliant.
Great. No, that's good. And again, it depends on what's important. Important to you, and you get a feeling that you care about from that, right? So you get a feeling from creating the food that way.
Thing was, I've got a spiralizer too, and we got really excited about it.
All right, I think this is even a new one to me, so this is something for me to look into. We'll see if I feel healthy and virtuous. So when, again, you think about this, and you think about what causes you to be emotionally connected to things, and as you're designing any kind of learning experience, think about the audience. Again, they're all going to be different people, but there will be some commonalities, right? In the workplace, you can stereotype a little bit. There are people who are drawn to jobs for certain reasons. There are people who, when we work with a retail customer service group, there are things you can do that are kind of the right style for most of the group. And within that, there's personalization and choice. But on the other hand, I've done a lot of work in retail. The kind of thing you would design in general for an audience of the people who unload the trailers, which we've actually done, is very different from the kind of thing you might design for people who are in customer service. It's just a different, it's a different preferred style. And the better you know the audience, the better you can create that. And then within that, you can allow for all sorts of personalization, as we've seen here. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about motivation really quickly, and we've kind of seen it and covered at this point. This is a little graphic. Intrinsic motivation, it's internal, right? So it's driven by your own interest. You actually care about this. Extrinsic comes from outside, right? And so much of education and corporate training comes from external, right? It's extrinsically motivated. Why are you doing this? Because I have to pass the test to move on. Because it's mandatory, because I'm told by my supervisor that I must do it. The more we can get away from that, I think there's probably a Freudian slip in there, I know what companies I've been talking to, but the more we can get away from that and focus on things that people are intrinsically motivated by, right? Everything we've talked about today, all of your stories and all these cases were things that you actually cared about. People who took the pro bono course, they were inclined to want to be good at pro bono law, but they found themselves really caring about the course. They didn't finish the course because they were told to. Well, some of them did, but most people finished the course because they found it interesting, they found it helpful, they found themselves caring about it, they found themselves enjoying the experience. Okay, it's a very different thing. Related to that, I'll tell you a story about an experiment from the late 90s. On resource limitations, which kind of plays into the way we think about educational design and design of training and performance support and everything else. In the study, what they did, some psychologists in the US, and what they did was they ran an experiment where they had a room which had, on one side of the room was a table of radishes, which don't taste particularly good, and on the other side was a platter of chocolate chip cookies. Okay? So there were two groups of people. First group of people walk into the room, they could eat whatever they wanted. And they always chose the cookies, amazingly. Not a surprise. Second group of people was asked to go into the same room. Okay, so this is the second experimental group. But they were told, you can't eat the cookies. Okay? So you've got to eat the radishes, and not only do you have to do that, but you have to do that while sitting there in a room with these good cookies. All right, so interesting in and of itself. Okay, people reacted the way they reacted. Nobody really liked the radishes. People weren't all that happy about it. The experiment actually wasn't done at all. In fact, this was not what people thought they were getting into. What they did after that was they gave people a very difficult problem, in fact, an unsolvable problem. Okay? So they would give them a problem that was just impossible to solve. And they would ask them to go work on it. What they found was the people who had had the cookies worked a lot longer on the problem than the people who ate the radishes. Okay? So the people who had gotten what they wanted and had it kind of easy and hadn't put forth this effort to resist the cookies, they lasted a lot longer. The people who had put forth all this effort to resisting the cookies, they quit a lot faster when it came to doing these other problems. These are seemingly unrelated things, right? How would cookies and radishes have anything to do, okay, with, you can see what we have. How could that have anything to do with something entirely seemingly unrelated? All right, so again, here's a study, radishes, cookies. Okay. And then we get the unsolvable problems, and this is what happened. So the people who forced themselves to eat the radishes quit faster. All right, they did a second experiment where they were people asked to make a speech, and some people got to choose their position, and some people didn't get to choose their position. Okay, and again, in that case, we saw something similar. The people who were, interestingly, the people who chose the position here quit faster. That's interesting. So there was an effort to choose your position. Okay, so this is a study about effort. Okay, so with a summary of all this, the conclusion was that a broad assortment of actions make use of the same resources. Again, you think these things are unrelated. Making a difficult decision, resisting eating good food, how does this have anything to do with solving a problem? But it did. Acts of self-control, decision-making, active choice, these seem to interfere with other acts that follow. So in terms of, again, tying this back to what we're talking about with e-learning design, where do people choose to focus their limited resources? They have limited resources. So we want people to pay attention. We want people to focus. We've got to give them something that they're going to care about. Okay? Because when we're designing education, training, performance support experiences, we're competing with people's full attention with everything else that's going on in their lives. And we don't want them to just do it. We want them to really do it and care about it and do it well. And this is something that, got to keep in mind. Okay, talk a little bit more about effort. I'll tell you 2 quick stories from my life. Last year I went and gave a talk in Brazil, which is a nice place, a really nice place to go. I did not mind getting invited to Brazil. It turns out that as a US citizen, getting a visa to go to Brazil isn't really all that easy. Apparently this is for reciprocity reasons. The US makes it difficult for Brazil. They actually say this. Okay, this is actually listed. For reasons of reciprocity, you have to pay, I think it's like $500 and fill out all of these forms. I did not have the opportunity to go lobby the US government to change the Brazil policy, so I didn't have to go through this. So this was kind of a cumbersome process. I mean, I did it. I had committed to the talk. I was going to go. I wanted to go. I filled out my forms. I made sure I had exactly the right size photo according to the measurements, which were a little bit hard to read. And I had all the forms filled out exactly as they said and used, capital letters where they said capital letters and left the blanks where they said blanks. And I did everything really, really carefully. And you know why? Because I didn't want to have to do it again. That's the only reason, right? I wanted this to get done. I did it so I could complete it successfully, and that's it. Now, the goal was simply to complete it successfully. But if you ask me today, a year later, or even the day after I got the visa, which I did, to remember anything about what I just did, I would have no idea. Okay? It's just in and out of my head. So for the purposes of applying for a visa, this was fine. For purposes of education, you want to cram for a test and remember it and spit it all out and, even if you pass the test, ask me these things the next day, I'm not going to know what to do. Okay? And my effort was really, really focused toward simply completing it. I didn't care. I didn't go above and beyond in any way. I did just enough to make sure I did this job. Another story from my life. This is Delilah. I dogged for 15 years. And a couple years ago, she was diagnosed with cancer. Older dog. Kind of happens. Got really, really lucky in a lot of ways. Great vet. Turned out that also a friend of mine had a friend who was a veterinary oncologist. My first response was, wow, there are veterinary oncologists. And the second was, well, that's great. And so she helped tremendously. But when I found this out, I had trusted my veterinarian. I had this oncologist. I did a lot of, hours of research. Online, I even bought books. I talked to people. I sought out, you walk in her and you're talking to people and you're asking them for their experiences. this was a major, major effort for quite a long time, right? The amount of effort I put into trying to figure out everything I could. Not that I don't trust my vet, but she's one of his many patients. I'm going to know everything about her particular specific condition. I'm going to take what he tells me, and I'm going to find out everything I can. And maybe go back with him and say, hey, some of the things you read online, you want to check, right? You don't want to just, read a lot of panicky stuff online, too. So there was a little downside to that, right? Everybody's panicking when they're posting about their pets online. But you found some useful stuff, and I really did a lot of research. I did a lot of medical research, which is not my field. Compare this to Brazilian travel visa. That one I did the absolute minimum to get by. This one, I really, really cared about it, and I did everything I could. Okay? If there was a test or not, it doesn't really matter. I did above and beyond everything because it was something that I really cared about. Okay? So kind of the key point here is there's effort and there's effort. Okay? So, in most educational situations that we've, been involved in, employees and students, they're really going to try to just get it done. And we'd like to create experiences where they can do a lot more than that. Okay? All right. And for a couple more quick examples, this is a really old example, and then I'll give you a little bit more of newer stuff. This was a simulation for Boston Chicken. Boston Chicken is now Boston Market. This was back in the 90s. They are a semi-fast food restaurant in the US. And I was involved in doing cashier training for them many, many years ago, and this was considered at the time to be kind of the first educational corporate training simulation. And the audience was cashiers, okay? So the goal was to help them use this cash register. They had kind of a complicated cash register, which you'll see in a second. And the goal was to make them fast and accurate. So somebody comes in and they order a half chicken with sides, they have to know what keys to push. And it's not exactly the keys you think it would be. So it takes some practice. And sometimes there are questions they need to ask. How are you going to pay? What are the sides? There's an order in which things have to do, okay? So put together this game-like simulation where you play the role of a cashier. You're going to be a cashier. And this is, right there. That's what the keyboard looked like on the right. That's exactly what it looked like. And there's some things you could do on the left-hand side. You could ask questions of a little tutoring component, and you could talk to the customer. And at the top, right next to the Boston Chicken logo, are two really, really interesting things. They're two performance meters, speed and accuracy. Okay? So how fast are you doing this, and are you getting it right? People really enjoyed this simulation. Okay? They got competitive about it. They wanted to get 100. They wanted to get great speed and great accuracy. Okay? This is cashiering. This is not a job that's considered intrinsically fun normally, right? But by virtue of this kind of game, it worked really, really well. Now, the other thing that made it work well was this wasn't just a game that cashiers were doing as part of the training. This is a game that's about the actual job, right? These are the real performance measures. It's how well can you do? You're really doing speed. If you want to be good at cashiering, speed and accuracy are pretty important. So is customer service, but this is a focus on using the machine. Okay, so again, here's another one where we saw this emotional connection to the job. We had game-like, in the right sense of game-like. It was realism. You had guidance and feedback to help you along, which we can't get to see without a longer demo. And the challenge of this game really played a lot of, there was a challenge, but it was realistic challenge. It wasn't artifice. It was reality. Okay. One more quick story about audience, and I have time for another demo, and then we'll wrap up in a couple minutes. I was once asked to go into a high-tech company to train their salespeople. And the idea was to go in and create a simulation. This was actually the contract. Simulation for salespeople to teach them how to sell some new services that were coming out. And these were people who mostly had sold products, and services were kind of new to them. So you walk in and you sit down with some of the target audience members, and you want to talk to them about their jobs and understand who they are. And the thing that became clear within about the first 30 seconds, if not before, was these were not people who thought they needed any training about anything. Okay? They did not want training. They didn't need training. They didn't want to hear about training. So had we gone ahead with the project as it was planned, it was going to be something that they did reluctantly, if at all. They would do it at the last possible minute. They weren't going to care about it. They were going to get the least possible out of it, right? It was going to be the Brazil travel visa of training. But instead, by recognizing this, we were able to totally change the project. Instead, it became mostly performance support. We interviewed a lot of experienced salespeople who dealt with similar problems, got them on video, put that together in kind of a nice, indexed and searchable form, and rolled that out much more as a performance support piece for salespeople. Like, look, okay, we get it. You guys are really good salespeople. That's why you're here. You know what you're doing. But here's something that's going to help you. This is a little different. Even if it isn't, here are some situations that you haven't encountered, or maybe you have. Whenever you need it, it's here. And even the parts that were simulation were cast as kind of, practice, do it when you want. Okay? So the audience, plays a big role. Who are they and what do they care about? And that's going to help them emotionally connect. Okay. show a little bit more of the demo of the legal services. I want to show you just a little bit more about that. We've kind of gone through what this course is, but I do want to show you a little bit about what happens after this. So after we've seen Ray and Jane, we go ahead and we see a little bit more from the instructor.
Well, we've seen Ray Richardson interview Jane Wilson and collect a lot of information from her. And now we want to think about the meeting some more. And you absolutely are able to watch it again if you'd like to refresh your memory. Here's what I want you to think about. Given what we've covered so far, your own experiences and background, and what you've learned from the discussions we've had today, what would you do next? If you were in Ray Richardson's shoes, what would you do after collecting the information?
Okay, so here you get to make a decision. Again, you're not just watching. You've watched the scene, which was compelling. You're already into this. But now you're thinking about, what would I do next? And this becomes an activity where people collaborate with each other, okay? So you know, what would you do? It goes to a discussion forum. These are attorneys. They argue about things. They argue about this. So I would do this. Well, you're crazy. I would do it this way. And, you know, these are people who have some level of experience, certainly in law in general, and that's what they do. So there's a nice activity here that, again, brings people together, helps them collaborate, and gets them to do something that they're interested in, and forces them to think about it, reflect a lot of the good things that we have. The instructor also, and I don't have time to show you her stories, but she does tell a lot of stories in her short clips. So she'll tell stories of her own experiences, which you can learn from. Okay. So again, it worked. Specific realistic situations shown in video scenarios, specific examples of her own. The activities were grounded in specific examples and a very focused discussion. Okay. A little bit more about stories and storylines. Storyline in this context, I think, refers to an ongoing narrative. So in the course that we just saw, you know, we follow Ray and Jane throughout the course. And then there's a part at the end where you get a different situation and you get to analyze it. You get to, you know, the last part of it is called the capstone activity. You're introduced to a new attorney in a totally new situation. And you get to apply what you've learned and evaluate how she did. So, but throughout the course, you see Ray and Jane. And so the instructor can refer to concrete examples. She's not just saying, you know, ask good questions of your client, or not even saying, ask your client for specifics. You're seeing, hey, when Ray said to Jane, you know, tell me more about exactly what your husband said when he left, that's a specific question that you want to answer. And she can refer to it. It's concrete, it's specific, and it connects people to it in an emotional way, and cognitively it's great. So this works out in all ways. Storylines can also allow learner control as in online simulation courses, and that's you know, really, really big advantage. And I do have a simulation demo that I don't quite have time for, but again, storylines are terrific in a lot of ways. So you get learner engagement, you get concrete, in-depth, experiential examples with or without an instructor. The simulation example that I have is you're trying to, it's another lawyer one because we're allowed to show those. You're having a sales conversation with someone that you're trying to sell work to, and you have to decide what to say to her. And that one's totally self-paced. There's no instructor. You know, it's totally your own experience. Okay, so we're going to skip this demo and save it for another time, but I'll be around if anyone wants to see another demo later. Stories, a lot of different formats. You know, they don't all have to be in the context of courses. We've talked a little bit about performance support. We've talked a little bit about, you know, how to do things just in time, split them up. Video stories are great. You know, the high-tech salespeople, give me a video story. Hey, I'm facing this kind of resistance. I think we've got the best, you know, we've got a service that I think is great. They're telling me they don't want it, you know, they're telling me it's too expensive. We're cheaper than our competition. Why is that? You can find somebody who's encountered that and what they did. You know, multimedia stories, meaning, you know, more than just video, but kind of things, you know, you can click, you can annotate, you can contribute, you can comment. You know, obviously audio and text and examples and all that kind of thing. Okay, and I don't want to forget, just before we go, learner-created stories. So, you know, social learning is terrific for people generating their own stories. Okay. When using stories in education, context matters, you know, tremendously, right? You want to set the context for the story. What's it really about? What's the lesson that you're going to learn? What's the abstraction at the end? So it's not just, here is the story on its own, but it's how are you going to really take away the right thing. So we don't want to just give you the abstraction, but we want to make sure you understand the point of the concrete example, and it's all too easy to not do that. That's actually one of the advantages of a lot of things we can do in, not just online, but in learning in general, as opposed to our real-life experience. So, you know, in my own real-life experience, I guarantee you I make mistakes. I always talk about managing people as one where I'm certain that I make mistakes. Okay, not that big a part of my job. But certainly I've had conversations with people where they've left my office and I thought, hey, here's someone who reports to me and wow, that went really, really well. And you know what? They don't really think it went really, really well. And I don't know, because you don't ever get feedback. But in the right kind of environment, and online can be really, really good for this with simulations, you can get feedback from the environment on how well you're doing. Okay. So setup, follow-up, experience design should allow people to make abstractions and see how to apply the stories. Okay. We've seen some ways to design activities around the stories. We have just-in-time stories within a simulation. So if I make a mistake, it's a great time to hear from somebody, hey, I made this mistake once and this is why, or here's what I would do differently. Goes back a long time to some of the early days. Creating your own stories, analyzing them. We had the attorneys discussing them, debating, deciding what they would have done differently. What if you were Ray? What do you think Ray did badly? What do you think Ray did well? Okay. And again, just sort of familiar points. Stories are great because they're situated, right? This is situated knowledge. You're seeing it in the realistic context. Authentic stories, and they're concrete and improve understanding of abstract concepts. Okay? And then, as we've seen, they're engaging and emotionally compelling. One quick one before we run out of time. But, I couldn't show you the long version in the legal education course. But she had a client, the instructor herself, who is a lawyer, had a client that she's talking about, and she's telling the story of this client who was from another country, new to the US, as a lot of the clients who get pro bono attorneys are. And this client was not doing anything she asked him to do. Okay? Weeks were going by. You need to fill out these, you need to fill out these forms. Wouldn't do it. Came back, yeah, I'll get to it. Never did it. Finally, at some point, about 6 weeks into this, she said, I really need you to fill out this form. The client looked and said, okay, well, what I really need to know is when are you going to bribe the judge? That's what matters to me. This was the client expectation. Bribing the judge was simply a part of the process. That isn't actually how it works in the US, at least not most of the time. So this is something she had no idea to expect. But she tells a specific story and people understand, hey, this is a really good story and this could happen to me. Okay, we talked a little bit about social learning, and I will skim over that. We've kind of covered that at this point, and then we'll save a little bit of time for questions. Okay, so, final thoughts really. Traditional learning questions, what's the optimal spacing for learning events? All these kinds of things, a lot of research on that, and it's good stuff, right? You learn better when things are spaced, and that's all great. But you're not going to learn if you're not paying any attention. You're not going to learn if you don't care about it. You're not going to learn if you get an email reinforcing concepts every 2 weeks, and the first thing you do is close the email and don't read it. Okay? You're not going to learn if you're sitting in Madison Square Garden looking at 25 rules on the scoreboard. Okay? But instead, if you design experiences that people connect to them, the kinds of experiences you've had, online gives us all these options and more. We can be wildly creative with technology. Okay? Instead of taking the old methods and making them simply more accessible. Okay? Again, learning by doing, storytelling, social learning, all of these things play into creating learner experiences that really, really do connect. And just to wrap up with a quote from Steve Jobs that I really like, kind of about the use of technology. So he said, technology alone is not enough. It's technology married with liberal arts, with the humanities that yield the results that makes our hearts sing. So it's typical Steve Jobs, kind of in the, perhaps overly flowery way of saying it, but certainly agree with the sentiment. It's really a mix of, the use of technology is, in the ways that we want for educational design, is we're bringing together, the way people think and learn. We're bringing together things from the humanities and creating these emotional experiences. And with that, got a couple of minutes left, although not too many. So thanks so much for taking the time with me this morning.